Bring back rock.
Hey, it's Dean and welcome to Bring Back Rock. Today I'm going to tell you about a band you might have missed back in the day, and a band that included kind of a legendary voice in hard rock, Jeff Scott Soto. Let me tell you how I heard about him. It was probably within the last year. I was listening to Trunk Nation, and a caller called up and said, how come whenever I hear an interview with Jeff Scott Soto, nobody ever mentions the band Eyes? Now, Eddie Trunk had no idea the band Eyes even existed, so he said he'd check with them next time he talked to him, of course. But if I missed him back in the day, there's a good chance a lot of you might have. If Eddie Trunk missed him back in the day, there's a really good chance you might have missed him. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the band Eyes. But before I do, let me just warn you, there wasn't a heck of a lot I could find out about them, and some of the stuff that I did find out contradicted each other. So I'm going to try to sift through it, let you know what I know. Another thing that the caller said was that they sounded a lot like Firehouse or Def Leppard, kind of in that vein. I did not agree with that, except that it's a very well-produced, very highly produced album, and more on the commercial side of the hard rock, heavy metal of the 80s. So I'll let you listen at the end and decide for yourself, and let me tell you what I found out about the band Eyes. Okay, let's talk about the band Eyes and how they got started, and some of the past members. Now, the first one I want to talk about is Jizzy Pearl. I heard he was a former vocalist. I have found no proof other than one article. Number 2, James Christian, most famous for being the vocalist for House of Lords. Also, bonus points in my book for marrying vocalist Robin Beck. Now, James Christian did record an album with a band called Eyes. It was released in 1978 and it was called We're All in This Together. They were based out of Connecticut. However, I have found no connection between that band and the band featured in this video. Next, I need to talk about a band called LA Rocks. Now, I had heard that LA Rocks had Kelly Hansen and Chuck Wright in it. Chuck Wright is most famous, of course, for being in House of Lords and in and out of Quiet Riot for the past 40 years on bass. Basically, since Metal Health, he played a couple songs on that album ever since Metal Health. Through the current version of Quiet Riot, it's either been Rudy Sarzo or Chuck Wright on bass. I know a couple other guys have kind of filed through. I saw them play with Sean McNabb on bass back in the day, for example. But back to LA Rocks. So LA Rocks apparently had Chuck Wright in it, and I heard one version say that they had Kelly Hansen on vocals. Chuck Wright went back to Quiet Riot. Kelly Hansen went to Hurricane. They got Jeff Scott Soto on vocals, changed the name to Eyes. I don't know if that's true. I also heard Kelly Hansen auditioned for Eyes after Jeff Scott Soto left. That seems more likely just because the timeline lines up. That have been about the time Hurricane ended. So Kelly Hansen may or may not have had some connection with his band. I have no clue. I can't find any verification. So what really happened that we know of is that there's probably a band called LA Rocks. They broke up. They reformed with some new members and changed the name of the band to Eyes. They were quickly signed to Capitol Records under a development deal. And the band recorded a full album's worth of material for Capitol Records before Capitol passed. They were then signed to Curb Records. Curb Records was the biggest country label at the time. They wanted to expand into other musical genres, and Eyes was their rock band. Right now we're talking about the classic lineup of Eyes. Steve Doherty on guitar. He played with Burning Rome and Berlin and other bands around the LA area. Jimmy O'Shea on bass. He played in Cacophony, which featured Marty Friedrichsen and Jason Becker. On drums, you had Aldi Damien, and on vocals, Jeff Scott Soto. Probably most famous at this time for have played with Yngwie Malmsteen on his first 2 records. So the band spent about 2.5 months recording their debut for Curb Records. Spencer Proffer was tapped to produce, but according to Jeff Scott Soto, the whole album was produced by the band themselves. Spencer would just show up once in a while and say, sounds great, keep doing what you're doing, guys. The band were going for a big, highly produced sound like Def Leppard, and they produced a really good sounding record. In 1990, the band released their self-titled debut on Curb Records with the first single and video, Calling All the Girls. The album didn't do much, and according to Jeff Scott Soto, it was because Curb really didn't know how to handle a rock band, dropped the ball. He said he had 3 different tours lined up with major rock bands for them to open for. Curb didn't want to finance any of them. and Jeff soon left as he was pulling double duty with the band Talisman at this time. Here things get a little bit confusing again. They released their second album, which was actually the first album they recorded. Remember that album's worth of material they recorded for Capitol Records? That's what they released as their second record, Windows of the Soul. It was done without Jeff Scott Soto's knowledge or approval and was done mainly to capitalize on its growing popularity in Europe. This album is not as highly produced and probably not as heavy, but there are a number of fans who like this album better than the debut. There are also a couple of songs that are on this record that were re-recorded for the debut album. There was one final album recorded with vocalist Mark Weitz called Full Moon, and it was released in 1994 on Empire. So the releases were the self-titled debut on Curb Records in 1990, Windows of the Soul in 1993 on Brilliant/Damien Dream Records, and third was Full Moon, released on Empire Records in 1994. All the albums are in that 80s hard rock, commercial hard rock style. I like all three of them, but I much prefer the debut, and then Windows of the Soul, and then the final album. But I encourage you to listen to all three and decide for yourself. So where are they now? Well, you know the name Jeff Scott Soto. He's with Sons of Apollo with Billy Sheehan and Mike Portnoy. He's also in Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and he is about to have an album come out with David Ellefson, formerly of Megadeth. He has done a lot of recording in his career. Jeff has one more current project, the band Wet, W.E.T. If you like eyes, you'll probably like Wet. Aldi Damien went into producing and on the business side of music business. Jimmy O'Shea, where I found him, he's currently playing in a band called Pop Fiction in California, billed as Northern California's premier party band. Looks like a pretty big operation with an impressive song list. Steve Doherty. I'm not sure what Steve Doherty's up to. If you know what he's up to, drop a comment down below or message me. He had some impressive playing and I'd like to know what he's doing now. All right, it's music time. Let's get to some samples by the band Eyes, and then I'll catch up with you at the end to wrap things up.
Is your love alive?
was Eyes. You heard Cheyenne in there off of the second record. All the rest were off the self-titled debut. Where can you find them? Unfortunately, none of the albums have been re-released, so the only way to get a hold of them is through the secondary market like eBay or Discogs. The debut album you can find on streaming services. I usually like to point you to where you can support the band. Unfortunately, they're inactive, and since there have been no re-releases, it's hard to do that. Just want to point you to the music. There are some people on YouTube that have posted the albums for you to listen to on videos, and that's about it. So check them out. That was Eyes. I thought they were really good. If you like 80s hard rock and heavy metal, please hit subscribe. That helped me out. Also, if you want to get in touch with me anyway on social media, I'm going to show you how at the end of the video. And as always, thanks for watching.